Okay, so I'm going to do a follow-up video here for the mesh skinning and animation video series that I put out recently. I got a question or a comment on one of the videos. What if I have an animated object already? The object that I want to put on a building already has the animations in place. How would I basically go about, adding that to a building or whatever else I want to set it up to? Now, this doesn't have any animations on it, but, I just want to kind of show this part here. So if I go to my doors here, I've got obviously door 01, door 02, and then my animated part is here. Now, this particular door is obviously based on the animated door, but without the animations. So, they share the same vertex groups. Even though they are separate objects, they all share the same vertex groups and they are locked into the i3D shapes file and everything else. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that I don't have these doors here. So if I was to remove both of these doors, right, and this is my building that I've put together, and I want to add an animated door to it that already has the animations created. I didn't create them. I've just got an animated door that was done by somebody else, whatever, right? So I want to basically bring them into here. So if I save this now, this is overwritten everything else. There's no doors on this building, obviously, now. So what I would do is take my animated door and drag that in onto my, wherever. Put that in the appropriate place. So I'll just basically drag it up to my doors. And then I would have to position this, in the correct place where I wanted it to be. So, I would just drag this wherever I need it to be. So, I'm just going to do this somewhat quick here. Let's just add a light so I can actually see what's going on a bit better. So, let's see if I can position this somewhere about right. What I want to do here. Going to be a little bit tricky to do, but we'll work it out one way or another. So, let's see. This is why I like to do things, the way I did it in the video series, because everything I, put together in Blender, in Blender, I can specifically snap things into position where I want them to be and all sorts of things. A little trickier to do when you're in the editor here. As far as I'm aware, that there is no kind of snap feature. There is a snap feature somewhere in amongst all this. I forget where it is, this one here, I believe. So you have snapping mode, but I don't think that actually snaps to any geometry. It's just snapping to certain grid positions. So it's not really going to, work in the same way as it does, in Blender, where you can snap it to vertices, faces, whatever else. But I think that's pretty close, close enough for what I want to do here for the test side of things, okay? So there's my door, right? But this has the animations on it. So if I go into here, this has the animations. So I click play and the doors then open. They are working and everything else. Great, fantastic, right? But obviously I wouldn't necessarily want to have those animations on this building, because the idea is that I have a single animated file, i3D, that I then dynamically load into this, and through the vertex groups it clones that mesh onto what I've got in the placeable, and then the animations are run from the external i3D via the scripting and the XML and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so what I would do here then in this particular case is I would delete my light, for example, and then save this, and then I would close this down. And you can see now that my building has an additional file. It's now got an anim file on it, and I don't want that to be there, because the idea is that I have an external animation file. I don't want the animation to be built into my placeable to keep file size down, and so on and so on. So what I would need to do here is go into the i3D in a text editor. I'm using Notepad++. You can use whatever you want. So I would open this up in whatever text editor I choose to use, and then come down to the bottom here, and we've got animation, external anim file, and that anim file. So all you need to do here is highlight that line and delete it. and then click save. You need to do it this way. Delete that line first, and then close this down, and then delete your anim file, like so. And we're back to what we had before. And now if I open this up again in the Giants editor, if you do it the other way, if you delete the anim file first, you'll cause the Giants editor to potentially crash because it's looking for a file that is not there. So I would recommend to delete the line of code out of the i3D first, that external path to the animation file, then delete the anim file itself here, and then you should have no issues. If I come down to my doors now, I have no animations on there again. So we're back to what we started with a non-animated door, right? So all of these should be set up this correctly for my XML. So if I go into here and go to this one here, for example, so I've got my double door 01 save ID, open a frame 01, etc., etc., and that's basically what I've got here: open a frame 01, open a frame 02, and so on and so on. This would be for your i3D mapping, so you need to look at your i3D mapping and then obviously adjust that accordingly and whatever else. What I don't need in this particular scenario is the second one, because I'm just going to do the one door here. This is just a short video on how to set this up. So what I'm going to do is, let's take this one and we'll go to perhaps maybe this one here. And what I'm going to do is comment the section out. So that will basically prevent that from loading in. And I just want to make sure that that actually will read correctly. It should do. Yeah, that should be fine. So if I go ahead and now save that, and then I just need to comment out the additional sections here for the other parts. So it would be these ones here. So if I go from, I'm going to go from here to here, and we'll then comment those out as well, because I don't need any of those i3D maps. And we just should have the first one. So on the other one here would be this one, the door trigger. So we'll take that one and comment that one out. Whoops, wrong one. Go back, comment that one out as well. Please select. Okay. I need to select that and then comment that out. There we go. I've got it that time. So that should now be correct, I believe, for all of those parts. So we go ahead and save that. I'll just minimize that down. So now we've got our door in here and everything else. That's fine. We can close that down. So if I now go into Farm Sim, and of course it wants to do an update, I'm going to do that later. Shouldn't matter for the update, just for this. So if we go into game here, I'm just going to load into Elm Creek, and that's fine. Okay, so we're now loading over game, and I'll confirm that. Don't need that, don't need that. Right. So now I should be able to go into here and then go to my placeable and put this down. And if I then go over to here, should have the door and everything. So if I go into F1, just make sure. Okay, so this actually, I didn't update the physics, but that's okay. That shouldn't matter. I'll do that in a second. But the door does actually work, right? That's what I was really trying to get across here. So, you know, if you have something that's already animated, I'll quickly just go in and check which ones are which. So if I go into here, go to this one, rigid body. Yeah, so this needs to be actually set to kinematic, and this one here needs to be set to kinematic. I could go ahead and save those. And then what I'll do is I'll just open the animated one up as well, because must have forgotten to do that one initially. Make sure that that is also set to This one, I don't actually think this one needs to be rigid body. No, this one doesn't actually need to be rigid body in there because it's just cloning it onto the one that's already here. So if I now go back into game, and we'll do that later, what we should find is that the collisions will work. That's the main thing. If I go back into here and start. Now that I've started Farm Sim for the first time today, this should load a bit quicker, which is why I paused before. Yep, there we go. And confirm that. No. And if I then go into here, placeables, I'll just put it down here for now, that's fine. We should have no errors. Don't worry about the PNGs. I never bothered adding the store icons and whatever else. But so now if I try and run through the door, obviously that's not going to let me go through there because I've got the collisions. But I can actually now operate the door, and then when I go through, the door is now open, the collisions are moving. So basically all I'm doing here is just cloning the animation onto the parts of the building here that are mesh skinned. Okay, and everything is all working as intended. You know, so if I go into here, turn on my light, we should be able to see all the animations are working as intended. Okay, so if you have an object that is already animated, you didn't create it, you can add it into a building if it's done in this particular way. Now, as far as mesh skinning goes, generally speaking, what you would have is the entire building, the actual building and everything, including the doors, windows, whatever else is animated. It would all be one object. It would not be separate objects like the way I've done it here. Now, I've done it specifically this way to show how you could create an animated door that you could then add to any building. Now, the downside or a slight caveat to that is that obviously the way that I created this building, I created the building for the door specifically. Okay, so because you cannot scale or, you know, you can't change the size of the door. Basically, you can't scale it or whatever else. And I'll show you that. So if I go back into here and I go to Giants Editor, because this is mesh skinned, if I try to scale this in any way, shape or form, if I add a light, what will happen is it will basically break the door. So if I go into door here and I try to scale this, so let's just say for argument's sake I want this to be a little bit smaller, I do 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, you can see that the actual mesh itself has scaled, but the visual is still the same size, and it will break your animations. So you literally, there's no way around that as far as I know. Even if I was to put this into a separate transform group, so if I was to create a transform group, put this into here, then put that into that transform group and scale this transform group. Now, what's going to happen here, as soon as I try to scale this, it's going to use the origin point of this new transform group. So what's going to happen is that it's going to scale away from wherever it is. Now, what I could do to get around that, for example, if I take that out of there, I could copy the values from here with Shift Control C, put that onto my new transform group, then put this door inside of that transform group, and it will now, the origin point of that transform group will match the same as the door. But again, if I try to scale this, so if I do 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, you're in the same situation. It's scaling the mesh, but not the actual object itself, and they are different. There is a difference between the two. Because it's mesh skinned, you're going to end up running into some errors and issues, because parts of it are not going to be scaled along with everything else, and it's all going to get broken, and you know, it's just not going to work, basically, to my understanding, the way that, you know, I understand how this sort of stuff works. Even if I you know, freeze the scale. So if I go into edit, freeze transforms, and freeze the scale here, that will then zero all that out. But as far as I know, that's not going to work either, because this is a child of that, it's now going to mess all of these values up. So yeah, I don't think that there's a way around that. You know, there possibly could be, but you'd have to experiment with that a little bit. But potentially the door, whatever object you have that's animated, is going to be that size. You know, shape, size, whatever. You can rotate it. You know, so if I wanted to have this door over here, for example, I could do that. I could just rotate the door. That's fine, no problem. That should still work. But you cannot, you know, again, as far as I'm aware, you can't scale it or whatever. You can't scale it because it's not going to retain those values anymore, because the animation just won't work. Again, that's something you'd have to play around with. You might be able to get that to work, but you'd have to have a building that specifically, or that would accommodate the animated object that you're putting onto it. Okay, so just wanted to point that out. But you know, if you have an animated object, an object that is pre-animated by somebody else, and you wanted to add that to, you know, another a building or whatever else that you've created, or you know, you've got just a random building that you want to add a door to, then you could do that. You know, there's no reason why you couldn't do that and then set it up in the same fashion, as long as you then, as I showed earlier, once you've added it to your placeable i3D, go into the i3D in Notepad++ or whatever text editor, scroll to the bottom or wherever it might be, and remove that external linked anim file, and then delete the actual physical animation file from that, you know, from your placeable i3D, and you should be able to then, you know, get it all working, as long as you correctly set up your animated objects in here with all of the correct i3D mapping. You should be okay and good to go. Give it a whirl, see what you find, but yeah, it should work okay, no problem, as I've shown here. The only thing you might run into, is that because potentially the animated object that you're adding, it wasn't designed for the building that you're adding it to, it might not fit 100% correctly. But you know, again, that's something you'd have to try and work around one way or another. But if you're not comfortable creating the animations, but you are comfortable doing small editing in Blender, theoretically you could actually, you know, create an object of a similar shape and size to the door that you're trying to add, or whatever animated object it might be, and then just take your object, your building, into Blender and make the hole bigger that way to fit the actual animated object in that sense. But you know, again, that's something you'd have to kind of work out for yourself. But obviously this building was created specifically for the size of this door, you know, the opening and everything else. You know, if I hide this opening here, and equally this one was created specifically for, you know, in that size, scale, whatever, was created specifically for the size of this door, to make it fit and look right and everything else. So yeah, hopefully that kind of helps you out there. You know, adding pre-animated objects to an existing building, whatever, you might be able to work around that, you know, with what I've shown in the video here.